are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Join with me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
Alright, man. So now that the NBA offseason has kind of calmed down a little bit, we're getting closer to training camp within the next month or so. And we kind of have a better look at what these teams are going to look like heading into next season. So now it's kind of time to look back to see which teams or players were the winners or the losers of this year's offseason. And, man, there was a lot of movement in this offseason, man.
Yeah, man, it was definitely crazy. It definitely kept up with the trend over the last couple of years where it was like a crazy offseason. Despite the fact that going into this offseason, this was looked at as a very, mediocre offseason, not much movement. But even though there weren't that many stars that moved, the rest of the league pretty much moved.
Yeah, I think what we saw with a lot of team building, especially after the Bucks won the title, I think that really kind of reshaped the thought process that teams have in terms of we can build a team and circumstances could work out that we can end up in the finals or winning a championship.
Well, not just the Bucks, I would say even the Phoenix Suns, you look at them, right, at what they did. They made one trade, and the rest of the team, they made a very good overall team. And a lot of, I think, franchises are looking at that now that even if teams have a super team per se, a good team can always beat a stacked team, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think what we're kind of seeing is team building requires finding players to fit every single role that you need. And sometimes you don't need a superstar level player to do that. You can, a role player, a good solid role player to fit a role works really well. Noting all that, let's jump right into some of the winners or losers from this offseason. So we'll start with the winners. And I think the first winner, and it's a little bit of a surprising one, it's one that heading into this offseason, I don't think we saw them being as aggressive as they were, but it's the Chicago Bulls. So the Bulls, obviously the most notable additions, they brought in Lonzo Ball, they brought in DeMar DeRozan, both via sign-in trades. They signed Alex Caruso. They also just got Derrick Jones Jr. from another trade. These are some pretty big moves, man. The Bulls, they also lost a few guys. They lost Thad Young, they lost Al-Farouq Aminu, Thomas Satoransky, Lauri Markkanen, Garen Temple, Daniel Tice. But, man, these are huge moves to make. This instantly catapults the Bulls from a mediocre team in the Eastern Conference to they have to make the playoffs. Like, when you go out and you get a guy like Lonzo Ball, for instance, and again, Lonzo, although he's not as good as what he probably could have been, he's definitely a good player in today's game. And I think given an opportunity and given a proper role, which is what Chicago would give him, it makes sense. There's already a scorer. He can be the playmaker, and he can do what he does best. Not to mention DeMar DeRozan. Bringing in a guy like DeMar DeRozan, an established veteran player, a guy who can literally gives you 20 points a game easily, and, absolute professional.
Yeah, man. Like, these moves are very interesting because I think on paper, you see the fact that, hey, there's a bunch of names. Not to mention, we haven't mentioned Nikola Vucevic, who they just acquired last season. So on paper, there's a lot of mouths to feed, and there's only one ball to go around. However, if they're able to work this properly, I think it could work very well for the Chicago Bulls. To your point about Lonzo Ball in this role will not be asked to score pretty much at all. His main source of offense will come from catch and shoot opportunities, in which he shot nearly 40% last year, right? So he's turned himself into a very good shooter. Previously he was not, but through his hard work he was able to change that. So that's where his main source of scoring will come from. But to your point, his main role on the offensive end will be to get DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Nikola Vucevic the ball. He'll be asked to facilitate, and that's what he does best. And then on the defensive end, he'll be that point of attack defender, and he's also very good at that role. DeMar DeRozan, I think, is going to be the big, interesting, most notable question for this team. Because what kind of role will he play? He'll definitely be the secondary facilitator on this team after Lonzo Ball. He's turned himself into a very, very good playmaker in San Antonio, averaging nearly 8 assists last year. So that will definitely be a huge role for him in terms of him getting the ball to guys like Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, especially, for example, in the pick and pop with Nikola Vucevic. Zach LaVine will have a lot more catch and shoot opportunities. He won't be asked to carry as much of a burden as he did last year. So I think for Zach LaVine, these moves really help him out the most because he won't be tasked with doing everything on the offensive end like he had to do last year. And then clearly it was a big struggle last year if you only have one guy that can score the ball.
I think that was the commitment that Arturas Karnisovas was trying to make to Zach LaVine, saying that, listen, you're our guy. We're going to bring pieces to help you out, which I think that's what every front office should do when you have an established guy. When your main guy, you got to bring in pieces into that he doesn't have to do everything. And that's what you kind of see what the Bulls are trying to do. Now Zach doesn't have to be the playmaker. You got Lonzo Ball. Zach doesn't have to be the only scoring option. You have DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic. So these moves are definitely big moves, and they definitely move the Bulls into, very good status. The only concern that I can see with the Bulls and what they've lost, obviously, is defensively. Obviously, losing a guy like Thaddeus Young is a huge loss. I mean, not only is he just a great locker room guy, a great veteran, but defensively, he was an anchor for that Bulls defense. Even guys like Al-Farouq Aminu, solid defenders like that. Like they
Garrett Temple, Daniel Tice.
Exactly. They lost some guys who were responsible for the Bulls having a pretty good defense last season. And, obviously you're adding a guy, Lonzo's a pretty good defender, but when you're adding guys like DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, these guys aren't really known for their defensive abilities. But they did add a couple of additions that could alleviate that. Like Alex Caruso, I thought was a very solid pickup. Because not only now do you retain some defense, but he can also play alongside these guys too. Like you can have a smaller lineup where you can go with Lonzo, Caruso, LaVine, DeMar, and then maybe even you can go either Vooch or even go with somebody else as well. Like the Bulls have a lot of combinations, and they even just picked up Derrick Jones Jr. as well, who was a solid defender in his time in Portland.
When we're talking about defense, two more names that I want to mention is Patrick Williams, who had a terrific rookie season last season, and who's looking like a do-it-all type of player.
Even in summer league, we saw how he developed and how much of a defensive stopper this guy became.
Even if you look at his rookie tape too, like even from day one, this guy was making veteran plays on the defensive end. I don't think as many people recognize how good he actually was for the Chicago Bulls and how integral to that defense he was, even as a rookie. The second guy I want to talk about defensively quickly is Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine, he's not known as a good defender at all. But the interesting thing is, in the Olympics, when he wasn't tasked with scoring the ball every single time down the court, he actually played some pretty good defense. If we're going to get that more consistently from Zach LaVine, especially now that he has other options around him and he can expend more energy on the defensive end, he has all the tools to be good on the defensive end. And not to mention, he doesn't even have to be good. He just needs to be solid. And he's fully capable of that. And he showed that in the Olympics. So with less of an offensive role, I think Zach LaVine could also flourish on the defensive end.
Yeah, I think overall, like the Bulls, they made a big leap. Like these were very, very big moves that the Bulls made this offseason. And they really got to make the playoffs this year, and they should be competitive. But the thing with these type of moves is they are very big. Like, there's a lot of risk that comes with them. These moves can either work out very well immediately, or they can become massive failures. And I think that's kind of where the both of us stand on what the Bulls have done. Like, we feel like this could either work and be a great success, or it cannot work and be a huge failure.
I mean, going back to last season when they acquired Vooch, we were like, yo, this is an amazing move. Unfortunately, it kind of was terrible.
And it was the reason why Orlando had 2 lottery picks in this past
exactly.
stacked
So
draft.
it really did not work well last season. But again, with the training camp underway, with another year under their belt, I think this definitely has a lot of potential moving forward.
Yeah.
Speaking of another team that was very aggressive, I think the most aggressive team from the get-go was the Miami Heat. And the Miami Heat had one of the best off seasons in the league, I would say. And that's in large part due to one player, acquiring a guy like Kyle Lowry. Now, getting Kyle Lowry means that Miami now has a legitimate secondary player next to Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. He's a guy who can shoot and average at least 16 points on the offensive end. He'll help ease the burden on Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. Not to mention the fact is that his best asset at this point in his career is his playmaking. He's a great playmaker who can take reps from Jimmy Butler in terms of facilitating the offense, passing the ball around to guys like Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero. And especially, I think one thing that we will see that's going to be very lethal is the pick and roll with Bam Adebayo. We saw what he was able to do with a guy like Serge Ibaka and how great their pick and roll was on a possession-by-possession basis.
It's automatic.
It was automatic. And now you get an even better version of that with Bam Adebayo. So I think that's going to be very great for them. And then not to mention that he's still a very good defender at this age and obviously a great locker room presence. So that signing alone, I think, catapulted Miami into one of the winners of this offseason for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kyle Lowry for sure was a huge pickup. I think the Heat were trying to obviously get him for a very long time. You know, there were no secret. Like, they tried to get him at the trade deadline, and obviously tampering rules, aside, they were one of the front runners for Kyle Lowry and his services because of his relationship with Jimmy Butler. Obviously, I think Kyle is Jimmy's kid's godfather. I think that's what it is. But either way,
very close.
They're very close, and they're of similar mindsets. Like, we've talked about in the past about Heat culture and how Pat Riley wants a team like hard-nosed players, hard-working players, players that are going to, be aggressive defensively, and never always try hard and never give up. And Kyle Lowry is basically the personification of that. Like, he's gonna be a hard-nosed guy. He's gonna be a hard worker. He's gonna bark at everybody in the locker room. And that's the type of player that Pat Riley wants. And then on top of that, you're talking about what he brings to the table. He's not only a capable scorer, great playmaker. The pick and roll with Bam Adebayo is going to be lethal. But then, he's just a solid, steady overall player that you want to bring into your team. And I think people always say, he's not, he doesn't put up, the numbers that you'd want from a team, from a player of getting paid his amount of money. But the guy brings value on basically every statistical category that you want to see, and even the ones that where there really aren't stats for. Like, the guy takes how many charges per game, puts his body on the line, gets deflections, steals. Like, these are not metrics that are looked at very often, but these are the stuff that Kyle Lowry does on a game by game basis.
Again, he is a winner type of player,
exactly.
Right? He's just a winner. Casual fans won't understand the impact that he has, but if you're a real NBA fan, you watch the game, you know the game. You know how great of an impact guys like Kyle Lowry have.
Take it from us. We've watched Kyle for the last 7-8 years while he's in Toronto, and clearly we hold him in high regard. But again, the guy's a bona fide winner. He's going to do whatever he can to win. There are moments where he carried the Raptors, dragged them to win games that we probably had no business winning. So the fact that he are getting a player like that on top of what they already have is actually a huge success for them.
Another success for them was retaining a guy like Duncan Robinson, who is a top 5 shooter in the league easily, and is definitely one of Miami's most important players. If you look at how integral he is to Miami's offense, it can be argued after Jimmy and Bam, he's probably their most important player on the offensive end. Again, the contract, there's some questions about was the contract too much, but at this rate in the NBA, that's kind of the market for a shooter of Duncan Robinson's caliber. If Davis Bertans is getting what he gets, 75 mil or whatever you got.
Something like that, yeah.
Duncan Robinson's a top 5 shooter easily. So that's kind of what his market was. Another interesting thing Miami was able to do, which I don't know if many people saw coming, was they literally got Victor Oladipo for nothing. They retained him for nothing.
We kind of saw this coming, to be honest with you. I think you called it was like, it's kind of similar to the DeMarcus Cousins situation. Like,
let's hope that it doesn't end up like that.
Exactly. But Victor Oladipo signed for the minimum. He signed for the veteran minimum after making $21 million this past season. And he was, again, there are arguments. We are going to talk about this kind of later on. But he was offered some good contracts by the Pacers and by the Rockets and kind of turned them down. So Victor Oladipo is banking upon himself, taking a chance to hopefully compete for a championship and, at least use this year to kind of recover with all the talent around him.
Again, it's a low-risk, high-reward move for Miami. If he's able to retain some of what he was before, then awesome for Miami. They're literally paying him nothing to be Victor Oladipo. If it doesn't work out and he just can't play, then you literally paid him nothing in terms of NBA money, at least.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a good move for Miami. And then they also filled out the roster with a couple more players. They brought back Dwayne Dedmon, who is one of my favorite players for some reason. I don't know why, but he's a good player. PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris, just more of those Miami culture guys. More of those Pat Riley guys.
Yo, PJ is ring chasing and he doesn't care, man.
Yeah,
this guy won one and he's like, yo, I'm doing it again.
Well, same thing with Markieff Morris. He also has one under his belt. So they're both trying to get another one. And again, they're both guys that fit seamlessly in that Heat culture and will add to their value. Overall, for the Miami Heat, they basically just improved their areas of weakness, which was primarily their half-court offense and their playmaking. They improved that, and they really did not get any worse. So overall, it has to be said that this was a very successful offseason for the Miami Heat.
Yeah.
Moving on to another team who was in the news a lot during this offseason, we're talking about the Los Angeles Lakers.
Of course we are.
Yeah.
It's the Lakers.
And again, the moves that the Los Angeles Lakers made were very controversial, no doubt. People had a lot of questions about them.
Why, you don't like the retirement home?
The retirement home. But considering what they were at last season and the season that they're going into now and the potential that they have, because again, we're assessing the winners and the losers of the offseason, not of next season.
Yeah.
So however this season goes for them, they at least are winners of this offseason in our books. So basically, like I said, after losing last year in the first round and the way they did, it was disappointment overall. The Lakers had a lot of questions, for example, with inconsistent players like Kyle Kuzma, Montrezl Harrell, Dennis Schroder. And basically, they had no cap space, even though they had, 6 players under contract. So they basically did not have a team, and they had no cap space. Despite that, Rob Pelinka was able to pull off a bunch of moves similar to what he's done for the past 2 years, which, again, I got to commend Rob Pelinka for because he's pulling these moves out of his hat. They were able to get a third star in Russell Westbrook. Again, even if it doesn't work, the potential is still massive having a guy like Russell Westbrook. The great chemistry that he'll have with LeBron. Obviously, he's a very good friend of LeBron and Anthony Davis. The locker room presence that he's going to have. We've heard over the last year how much Washington players, how much, what team was he on before? Houston, right. How much all of these players have valued him and his locker room presence, his veteran leadership. So at the minimum, this is what he's going to give you as a Lakers fan. So even if the move is controversial, and yes, I think we can still say we're not big fans of the move, but it definitely has more potential than they had coming into the season before that.
Well, I mean, it's the best player they have had at that position since LeBron got there. If we're being 100% real, it's the best point guard they've had. And that was their biggest thing. They were looking for that starting caliber point guard, and they finally got one in Russell Westbrook. Now, is he the best fit next to LeBron and AD, especially with the lack of shooting? No. If we're going to say, to be safe, we're going to say no for now. But it could change. There could be ways for it to work. LeBron could be more of a spot up and have Russell Westbrook on ball. Him and the pick and roll with him and AD will probably be very lethal. Transition game. Russell Westbrook is amazing in transition.
Yeah.
And again, not to mention you talk about the other benefits he brings with the locker room presence, how he's, LA native, the community aspect. Like, bringing Westbrook to LA is a good PR move for the Lakers after a very tumultuous season, but it could be a very good on-court fit as well if it works
Not
out.
to mention, arguably the biggest reason why he's there is to help ease the burden of LeBron and Anthony Davis, and which he literally said on day one when he joined the Lakers. He said, my first job will be to ease the burden on those two guys. So he's coming into the Lakers with the right mindset. We know how hard he plays on a game-by-game basis. His effort, there's never a question about his effort. So he'll automatically endear himself to the LA fan base. Not to mention they already love him because, he's an LA guy. Speaking to your point, though, about shooting, the main issue I think a lot of people had with this move was that LeBron, was now your best shooter on the team. However, like I said, Rob Pelinka made a bunch of moves after that Russell Westbrook move and massively improved the team, especially in the shooting department. Adding a guy like, first of all, Dwight Howard, who's not a shooter, but just another great locker room presence, a guy they've severely missed last year, and it definitely showed. They retained him for nothing. And then adding guys like Carmelo Anthony, Wayne Ellington, Malik Monk, Trevor Ariza, Kendrick Nunn, and Kent Bazemore. All guys who can shoot the ball, right? And that was the biggest focal point for the LA Lakers after that Westbrook trade, to add guys who can surround those three players and shoot the ball. And they definitely did that. And the biggest thing for this, in terms of all of these players that they signed them for the minimums. They signed them for nothing, besides like Kendrick Nunn.
Dude, that's the pull and gravity of playing with, not only in LA, but playing with a guy like in LeBron James. Like, players will take the minimum to try to even get a chance at competing for a championship. And it's so crazy how we are finally getting LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony on the same team. Now, granted, they're both in different stages of their career now than what we wanted them to be if we seen them team up. But
almost happened in 2011.
It almost happened in 2011. But you know what? Now that we get to see it, I mean, Melo can still contribute, and it's great to see Melo in a position where he might be able to get a championship out of this. So, and seeing him with LeBron again, I think LeBron will do his best to maximize Carmelo. But then on top of that, Rob Pelinka addressed mistakes that he made in previous offseason. He got Dwight Howard back, and rumor has it with Rajon Rondo being bought out, he'll probably be back too. Then on top of that, they addressed the shooting. They got Wayne Ellington, great shooter. Malik Monk can be a good shooter if his off the court stuff can kind of be taken care of.
And again, with a veteran team like LA has, that's one of the big things for Malik Monk.
Yep.
That there's a lot of potential there with all of these older guys surrounding him.
Yeah, exactly. Trevor Ariza, good shooter. Kent Bazemore, also a good shooter. Kendrick Nunn's a very good player, a young player as well. So the Lakers, they basically swapped last year's team for this one. Now, yeah, it's very veteran heavy, but you can see the fit and kind of what they're trying to do makes a lot more sense than last year's team.
Talking about veterans, going on the opposite end, one of the best things that they were also able to do is re-sign their best young player in Talen Horton-Tucker. There's a lot of questions of
he was their only young player.
Well, basically, there's a lot of questions whether or not they would be able to retain him. There's a lot of interest from other teams, but they were able to retain him. And Talen Horton-Tucker, he's shown a lot of promise. Especially for, I've watched the Lakers a lot over the past couple of years, especially last year. He is a work in progress, but he has shown a lot of promise. Not to mention the fact that he's only like 21 right now.
I mean, his slashing ability is definitely there.
His defensive ability.
Is there. I think obviously he does need the shooting, but that will come. But in terms of just being a guy that you can bring off the bench who will attack the rim, he's definitely shown that he has a lot of talent in that department, and he's getting better, of course.
Exactly. And then also on the opposite end of the spectrum, in the sense of not retaining players, they were able to get rid of inconsistent players like Kyle Kuzma, like Montrezl Harrell. Both guys that had their questionable fits in LA. And arguably the biggest W for the Los Angeles Lakers this offseason is the fact that they got out of a bad Dennis Schroder deal. Which we're going to talk about Dennis Schroder afterwards, not surprisingly, but they were able to get out of his deal that they reportedly offered him.
Listen, man, last year's team just kind of showed us, like, the Lakers, the depth just wasn't there. Like, Schroder is not a starting caliber point guard. We've already established that. Kyle Kuzma, you can't have 0 points in a playoff game, and just not contribute anything at all.
Especially if you're looked at as a third option.
Exactly, you can't have 0 points. Montrezl Harrell, it was already a weird fit to begin with, but also Frank Vogel never trusted him. It was a weird fit for him to go to the Lakers in general. So now getting rid of those players, it's basically Rob Pelinka basically saying, okay, yeah, I messed up. Let me try to fix it, which I can respect. The guy admits that, hey, he made some mistakes, which, again, it's fair.
And again, in fairness to Rob Pelinka, most people, including us, were very supportive of the moves that he made last season. The unfortunate thing is they just didn't work out. And so him being able to flip that quickly and turn this into a completely different team, all the credit has to go to him. And again, like I said, the biggest thing is that now, after the season that they had last season and the way it ended, there's a lot of buzz and excitement back in Hollywood.
Yeah, no, for sure. After the way things ended last year, just having the fan base with the Lakers now rejuvenated and ready for next season, it's definitely a good thing for them, and it was a good turnaround overall. But finally, the final winner of the offseason, and yes, you can call this a homer pick all you want, but it's the final winner of this offseason is Masai Ujiri. Masai Ujiri, after a long, and I'm telling you, this is a long ass negotiation we had to wait through. I think it was 2 years in the making.
Very stressful as well.
Very stressful. Masai Ujiri has re-signed, a long-term deal. I think it's rumored around $50 million per year to be the president of the Raptors, and now he's the vice chairman of the Raptors as well. We praised Masai Ujiri a lot on this podcast. I mean, no bias at all, but he brought the first and only championship to the Raptors. He's been the driving force of what has been the best era of Raptor basketball, in our lifetime, and even like the history of the franchise. Like
on and off the court, not just on the court product, but culturally, the symbol that the Raptors has become, not even in Toronto, not even in Canada, but even, across the states and the world, we see the impact that the Toronto Raptors have. Now young players are coming into the league saying, hey, I would love to play for Toronto. Where if we go back 15 years ago, that would never, ever happen.
Yeah, and again, even with all the changes that have happened in this offseason, losing Kyle Lowry, obviously losing Kawhi, Danny after the championship surge, this fan base can still have faith because Masai Ujiri is here to make the right decisions. And just examples of some of the decisions that some of the good things he does do. His drafting, he's had some very good draft picks, especially late in the first rounds. He was the one who drafted Pascal Siakam at 27. OG Anunoby, he drafted with the 23rd pick. Norman Powell with 46. And now just recently, he picked up Scotty Barnes, which, again, was a question. People questioned it, but we saw in Summer League the promise and the potential and the fit that Scotty Barnes can have with the Raptors. Not to mention, to make good draft picks, you need good scouting. That's how they got a guy like Fred VanVleet. That's how they got a guy like Malachi Flynn at number 29. Like, the Raptors have a great scouting department, but on top of that, their developmental system is top-notch. I think every young player that was interviewed for the Raptors' top 4 pick mentioned the developmental system. Mentioned that, hey, look at these guys like Siakam, OG, VanVleet. These guys went into that system and they became, look at that, they became all-star caliber players, most improved caliber players because they developed in the system. And that's all because Masai Ujiri instilled that system. He instilled that culture. But then he makes calculated decisions. Masai doesn't rush into decisions. He'll make a move when he feels it's the right chance. Hence the Kawhi trade. People were bitter. And again, even us, we were kind of sad to see DeMar DeRozan go. But we understood that getting a guy in Kawhi Leonard is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You got to take it, and we took it, and look at that. We got a championship out of it. So, overall, I mean, even some of the things Masai has done in this offseason, re-signing Gary Trent, bringing in guys like Kem Burge, what's the guy's name? Precious Achiuwa, these are players that are going to make this team exciting now heading to the next season. Our team might be younger, it's not as flashy, and there's not many stars as there once was, but we have a young team that's developing, and with Masai at the helm, dude, we're not worried as a fan base.
Again, there's going to be growing pains, and I would like to say this to all casual Raptors fans. No, we are not going to be in contention. Relax, okay? That's not going to happen. But it will be a very intriguing and exciting team. I think this will be a very fun team to watch for years to come. One thing also I'd like to address with Masai Ujiri, there's a lot of, I guess, hate that goes around for Masai Ujiri simply because, he's praised so much, Obviously, when you have more success, that breeds more jealousy. We're not saying Masai Ujiri is perfect by any means. Aaron Baines, Bruno Caboclo, not great moves, right? No. Those were huge issues. DeMar Carroll, man. Having your center rotation be Aaron Baines and Alex Len was clearly not a good move. So again, we still don't know what the thought process was. I think in that respect.
We'll chalk it up to that's all he can get. After Serge and Mark left. But to your point, the type of moves that Masai makes, the presence that he is, the type of person that he is. Do you see a player an executive get this much press, this much praise and admiration in any sport? No, because every players know who Masai Ujiri is. They respect him. They want to deal with him. Scouts talk highly of him and his ability to not only make the right decision, but be able to, elevate people.
And not to mention, going back to Masai Ujiri's role now in MLSE, he's a winner because it's not just the Raptors that he's taking care of. He's taking care of the brand, the business. And that was one of the things that he said he wanted to do on whatever next team that he was on in terms of getting a new contract. He wanted to be involved in more than just the basketball. And he's done that throughout his whole career, obviously with NBA in Africa, basketball without borders and all that other stuff. But we just see the global presence that Masai Ujiri has. And for him, I think especially for him to be able to continue that moving forward in a franchise like the Raptors, in an organization like MLSE, I think was one of the biggest factors for him. And he's now going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think the last thing we'll say about Masai before we move on is he is the one of the best, if not the best executive in sports today. And I think I can speak for Raptor fans that we should not be worried at all. As long as we have Masai,
exactly,
he'll make this team better.
In Masai we trust.
And hopefully we'll get another championship out of it. Or 2 or 3,
Or 4 or 5.
Or 4 or 5.
So yeah, in Masai we trust. Moving things over and flipping things over to the losers of this offseason, we have to start out with the biggest one, the most meme-worthy one, of course. Dennis Schroder. Now, Dennis Schroder reportedly rejected a 4-year, $84 million deal. Now, this was probably true because of the fact that he never denied it. At least I don't think he ever denied it.
No, it was true. It was confirmed true.
Okay, well...
his agent basically said as much.
And he reportedly rejected a 4-year, $84 million deal from the Los Angeles Lakers. Like we said, the Los Angeles Lakers dodged a bullet because what were you thinking by offering him that? He bet on himself and followed it up with a subpar playoff showing, which resulted
being nice.
Yeah, which resulted in him getting a 1-year, $5.8 million deal with the Boston Celtics this year. And he didn't even get a mid-level option. Now, reportedly, Dennis Schroder was, what was the term? Surprised? No, devastated.
Yeah, I think he was in shock.
In shock. That was the term that they used. He was reportedly in shock that this was the extent of the offers that he was getting. And again, Dennis Schroder is much better than a $5.8 million player. But when you do stuff like this, we know how organizations are. When stuff like this happens, organizations tend to kind of band together to teach a player a lesson. And this is one of the cases where betting on yourself went wrong, aka Nerlens Noel, who we will also talk about later. This was definitely worse than Nerlens Noel.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, again, the fact of the matter is the Lakers, they got lucky. Like, honestly speaking, imagine giving Dennis Schroder $84 million guaranteed. Like, that's basically paying the guy, almost $21 million a season.
Yeah, $21 million.
For the next 4 years, you're paying this guy $20 million a season when the guy was absolutely garbage for you in the playoffs and, wasn't that great as your starter. So, the Lakers, they're probably so happy right now. But when you think about it, in Dennis Schroder's perspective, what did you think your value was? Did you think you were a $100 million player?
Well, reportedly, that's what he thought he was, which I don't know how, but...
I think there's a thing where players get an elevated sense of themselves, and sometimes agents do this too. Like, we'll talk about it with the Nerlens Noel situation. Agents will inflate you to make you think that you're worth more, which is what they're supposed to do. But sometimes you have to have that self-awareness to understand that, okay, I'm being offered 84 now, and this is before the playoffs, things are going well. Let me take the money. Let's take the money and hopefully we'll see, whatever happens. But we don't know what's going to happen. We're going into the unknown. That's why it's taking a gamble on yourself because you don't know. But history has shown when you take a gamble on yourself, more likely than not, it doesn't work out.
Yeah, exactly. Stories like Fred VanVleet are the outlier, right? They're the exceptions. They're not the norms. And I think it was like Chris Smoove or someone who said the shout out Chris Smoove, but he was saying basically, if you're a role player and you're getting offered $80-70 million, just take the deal. Unless you're a star caliber player, a top 10 level player, then sure, you can say, I'm not going to do this deal. I'm going to bank on my future. I'm going to bet on myself. But if you're a role player like Dennis Schroder, if you're players like Nerlens Noel, just take the deal, man. You're getting paid $70-80 million, man. Just take the deal at this point. But in terms of like the fit that Dennis Schroder will have with Boston and his on-court production this season, the issue is that, for Boston it works out great. He's a low risk, high reward player for them. But for Dennis Schroder himself, he's gonna go to Boston, who already has players like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, who will demand the ball. And this was an issue that even a guy like his predecessor, Kemba Walker, had. Kemba Walker was never able to properly fit in, even within Brad Stevens' system, because of guys like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. Again, no fault to those guys, but those guys are gonna demand the ball. And Dennis Schroder, when he's looking for a massive payday, like he will be next season, this probably won't help out. And not to mention, again, if he's gonna be sacrificing the team's success at the expense of himself trying to get that bigger contract, it's not gonna work out for him or Boston.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it in the sense that it's a low risk, high reward move for the Boston Celtics. But yeah, like Dennis Schroder needs to kind of, understand what his role is and what he's supposed to be doing. He's not, it's not like you're coming off the bench. You're not a sixth man. You're not just here to just score the ball. You got to facilitate, and you got to, as a point guard, you got to get guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum the ball. And that's something that Kemba struggled with. And if he struggles with that too in Boston, then $5.8 million might be the most money he's going to see for the next few years. So it's the crazy reality of the NBA and the business side of the NBA. But
and again, no chucking shots, because that's kind of what his career has been, right?
Yeah.
He's been chucking too many shots. Again, his OKC days were I think the ceiling of what he is as a player in the NBA. I don't think he's better than what he was in OKC.
But that's a perfect role for him to be in, to do what he does best. But he wants an elevated role, which is fine. You could want an elevated role, but you got to understand the nuances of that role and how you can fit and be the best version of you in that role. And I think that's the part that he's struggling with right now. So Dennis Schroder, definitely the first loser of this offseason. Which brings us into the next loser of the offseason, and it's the Portland Trailblazers. First and foremost, the Blazers,
I would say specifically Damian Lillard too as well.
But we'll see. I'm seeing the Blazers holistically because they've had a lot of negative press as a team. First of all, the Damian Lillard rumors of him wanting to leave, him not being happy with the front office. That was not a good look for the Blazers. Just because, again, Dame has always been a loyal guy to Portland. Like, I want to be here. I want to be a Portland lifer. Like, these are things that Dame has said previously. Now his mentality is kind of shifting. And you kind of notice it kind of happened as the Olympics were kind of going on. And he was kind of being exposed to star players. And even like while he was watching the finals and seeing the Bucks and the Suns were in the finals. And Dame was like, man, I wish I can be there.
Especially the fact that it's not like there was a bunch of stars in the NBA Finals. It was two very good overall teams going at it. And that's, Damian Lillard's probably never going to be able to get that co-star in Portland. But, the potential was a team like Milwaukee or Phoenix where you have a bunch of really good players around you. And unfortunately, that has never happened throughout his career in Portland. I think that's the thing that hurts him.
Yeah, and he's bugged by that. And then the Blazers, also the Blazers just let guys like Carmelo Anthony walk, and that wasn't necessarily a great look for them. And then the whole Chauncey Billups situation and his whole off-the-court stuff and hiring him. Like, the Blazers had a lot of negative press in this offseason so far. But I think the biggest reason why I classified them as a loser of the offseason, your star player has expressed his frustrations that the team isn't good enough. But you didn't add any players or make any moves to put your team closer to competing for a championship, which is basically what Dame wants. He wants the team to compete for a championship. But what did you do? You re-signed Norman Powell. Fine, that's a good move. You brought in Cody Zeller. Okay, replaces Enes Kanter. Brought in Ben McLemore.
Well, we'll see about who he replaces because remember, Yusuf Nurkic isn't under contract.
Oh, right. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I thought Nurkic is under contract.
Is he?
I think he's under
contract. Or I
contract.
think he might have, I don't know, I think he had an option or something. But either way, there was a lot of issues. There's a lot of tension between Yusuf Nurkic and Portland as well. So we'll see what happens with him.
Yeah, so then there's that. They brought in Cody Zeller. Obviously, Ben McLemore with another kind of low-risk pickup. They brought in Tony Snell. And just recently, they acquired Larry Nance Jr. from the sign-and trade for Larry Markkinen. And these are okay moves, but none of these moves make this Portland team significantly better than last year's team, which, again, wasn't even able to make it out of the first round against an injury-plagued Denver team. That's the part I think that bothers Damian Lillard the most. The fact of the matter that you could have made more moves. You could have explored more options, but you didn't. You could have probably brought back Carmelo Anthony for all, for crying out loud. You could have brought him back. You could have explored trades for CJ McCollum. Maybe do something big. Like, look what the Chicago Bulls did. The Bulls, they were like, you know what? We're going to go all in. We're going to go all in. We're going to make moves. We're going to give up draft picks, young pieces, and go for it.
And the Chicago Bulls have less of an obligation to go all in than the Portland Trailblazers.
Exactly. Like, they don't have a Damian Lillard. Obviously, Zach LaVine's a good player, but he's not a Damian Lillard. A Damian Lillard is a generational superstar, And I think that's basically where I'm at with the Blazers is that, they decided to stand pat, even though their star player is clearly not happy, and he could leave. If the Blazers don't win or even, show any signs of improvement, I think Dame will definitely demand and ask out, which I hate players doing that, but at the same time, if the front office isn't going to give you that same level of commitment that the player is, I kind of agree with it.
Again, we both like loyalty, but loyalty is to a point, right? And of course, don't forget this, NBA teams have no loyalty to players. So when players don't feel any loyalty to their teams, I don't have that big of an issue with it. I just want the loyalty from a competitive perspective. Right? Obviously, we all remember the Isaiah Thomas situation.
Yeah.
That was not great. But again, it comes to a certain point, right? LeBron in Cleveland, Damian Lillard here, other players that I can't remember right now. There's a certain point where, the player has a definite right to ask out and want to be, traded. And I think you pretty much hit the nail in the coffin, right? Blazers could have done more, but they just chose to stand pat and basically do nothing, which is the story of the Blazers franchise for the last 10 years, right? And throughout the Damian Lillard era. They're there, but they're not really there. And they don't want to do anything aggressive. I think, linking sports together, it kind of reminds me of the Green Bay Packers. Sort of similar. Again, Green Bay actually has won multiple times already. And they have a much better player in Aaron Rodgers comparatively than Damian Lillard. But again, I think two very similar franchises in the way they operate.
No, I think that's a very good example because you have two players that are basically asking for the same thing. Aaron Rodgers wants Green Bay to be aggressive and get players around him, and so does Damian Lillard. Like they don't want to leave, but if you're basically if as a player, if I'm like, hey, I'm playing my ass off for you guys, I'm doing this, I'm winning awards and accolades and leading the team, but you guys aren't showing me that same level of commitment, then why should I stay here? So for those reasons, I think the Portland Trailblazers are a loser of this year's offseason, which moves us on into another one of my favorite teams to talk about, especially when it comes to talking about them as losers. It's the Philadelphia 76ers. So the Sixers were pretty relatively quiet in this offseason in terms of signings. Like some of their big signings, they signed Andre Drummond to replace Dwight Howard.
That was, I think, the funniest one to everyone, man. That was just.
Listen,
funny.
man, I literally just wrote in my notes. I just wrote why, just why. Like even after Embiid clowned this guy on social media years ago, and probably still does. You went out and signed Andre Drummond after his value was completely tanked, and he's like, oh my God.
Him and Joel Embiid's first meeting pretty much says it all. If you've seen the video of the meeting for the first time, if you've seen the photos, it pretty much says it all. It was just, it's like you said, why? Just why?
That move doesn't make any sense. They also re-signed Danny Green to a 2-year, $20 million deal. So good on Danny for getting the money. But, he was also really good for them last season. So in terms of being that veteran guy, a defensive guy.
Again, his shot was in the playoffs and when they needed him an issue.
Hey, man, he still got 3 rings. Let's be real.
Hey, yeah.
He still got 3 rings.
He still makes a positive impact every time he touches the court.
Exactly. So bringing back Danny, pretty good move, honestly. And then mostly they kept the team intact. So why do I say the Sixers are a loser of the offseason? Obviously, signing Andre Drummond immediately puts them into that category. But the main reason why they're a loser is because of the Ben Simmons situation. Now, clearly they need to trade Ben Simmons. the communication has been cut between the both sides. Ben doesn't want to be there anymore. The Sixers don't really want him anymore. And, they need to trade him. The problem is Daryl Morey is doing Daryl Morey things and trying to play hardball with the league. He's basically like, okay, I'm going to trade a player that I know has a very low value from what he actually is a rebuilding project, is on a massive contract, but I want you to give me 4 first-round draft picks and an all-star level player for him. Excuse me? Like, if I'm an opposing GM, I'm just like literally like, I'm like, Daryl, like, what are you smoking? Like, seriously, dude. Like, do you want me to give up that much for a player that is such a high risk? And I said this when Ben signed his extension. Why do you pay a guy this much amount of money, 30s plus almost $40 million this season, when the guy has shown zero signs of improvement? And now here we are, a couple of years later, where the Sixers are now trying to get rid of Ben Simmons, but no team is willing to take him on because they're just like, that's a lot of money, first off. So we have to give up a lot of assets to match salary and all that stuff. And second of all, we have to rebuild this guy. We have to rebuild his image, first of all, because his image around the league is tanked. Like, you don't just not attempt shots and expect people to be okay with that. And then second of all, the guy doesn't know how to shoot. He doesn't attempt to shoot. Now, yeah, we see the offseason videos, blah, blah, blah. Do it on the NBA court. You can take all these shots in the offseason, these training videos. I got to see you do it in the NBA. I got to see you do it in a real live game. So, until then, why would any team trade for this player, especially for that asking price?
And then also, on top of that, Ben Simmons has not helped his trade value because there was a report about him, declining teams or saying that he didn't want to go to like 90% of the teams because they weren't, in conjunction with the lifestyle that he wanted to live. Or
okay,
whatever.
I didn't even know about that one, but now I'm just like, dude, what the hell, man?
Basically, he wants to go to the New York Knicks or Los Angeles Lakers or some other franchise like that.
Ben Simmons,
big nightlife, big, tabloids, all of that is what he wants to do, which, again, is a very typical thing that we've seen from Ben Simmons throughout his career. Unfortunately, like, bro, you're an NBA player first. That's your primary job.
No. Ben Simmons is the perfect example of a spoiled brat in the NBA. He was given way too much publicity, way too much praise early on in his career, to the point now where he thinks he can dictate everything. He doesn't realize the gravity of the situation where, listen, my value is at an all-time low. Nobody wants me. I can't do the one main thing I need to do in this league, and at my position. But I'm trying to look at nightlife and all this stuff. Like, no, get out of Philly, get into a gym, improve your game, and then you can talk about that stuff.
Again, Kobe said it best. He's a talented guy, but if he doesn't have that jump shot, it's gonna be tough for him. And Kobe said this in 3 years ago or something. Rest in peace, Kobe. Again, another thing Kobe was right about. But in fairness to Kobe, we were all right about that. We all said that.
Listen, I was right about this. I wrote a couple of articles about Ben Simmons, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago almost? And I was clowning comments and stuff about why I thought Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid should have been broken up. I don't see those same people anymore, by the way. Just letting you know. I don't see them anymore or hear from them. I guess, when you're right, I think silence is the best form of appreciation, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, overall, I mean, the Sixers, they did not really improve their team. They had a pretty good team, but they didn't really do much to improve them. They're probably going to go into next season with an unhappy star player and lots of questions and pressure. So, not great for the Sixers.
Yeah, the biggest thing is, do we look at the Sixers as a serious contender? And I don't know, some people do, some people don't.
Not in this East.
Some people do, some people don't. And that's the issue because the Philadelphia 76ers have to be looked at as a serious contender by everyone.
Well, you can't
and if they're not, then that's not a good sign.
Well, you can't have an MVP runner-up on your team and not be a contender. You just can't have that.
And then with the final team we're going to talk about for the losers of the 2021 offseason. Again, we put this last just because they weren't exactly the biggest loser, probably the least loserish, if that's a word I could say. We're talking about the Boston Celtics. Now, they didn't have a terrible offseason, but the biggest thing for them, similar to, I think, the Philadelphia 76ers, just, I think, with a little bit less pressure and, their stars are a bit younger. the biggest thing for the Boston Celtics is they didn't really do anything to get better. And that's the issue for them. Now, again, they extended Josh Richardson on a 1-year, $12.4 million extension once they acquired him from the Dallas Mavericks. They also extended Robert Williams on a 4-year, $54 million extension. Not a bad deal. That's pretty solid. And then they signed Enes Kanter and Dennis Schroder, like we mentioned, to all right contracts for them. They also gave Marcus Smart a 4-year, $77 million deal. Now, this was probably the questionable contract that they gave out. Now, again, Marcus Smart's potential and what he can be, his ceiling, this is definitely a good contract then. The issue is with Marcus Smart is his consistency or lack thereof, right? We've seen, for example, 2 seasons ago, I think, where he was pretty much a defense player of the year candidate, how good he can actually be. The issue is, for example, last season when we saw a little bit of a decline, where actually not a little bit, a pretty solid decline, where he wasn't that good on the defensive end. Obviously people don't watch, so he still somehow, did he get an all-defensive team? I don't know. He was talked about all-defensive team, but, guys like OG Anunoby got 0 votes somehow, of course, right? Because people don't watch. Marcus Smart was, looked as a very good defender, even though he really was not last season. He wasn't a great defender. And then his struggles on the offensive end are well documented in terms of him jacking up too many shots and him missing a lot of those shots.
Except against the Raptors, for whatever reason, the guy just goes to God mode.
Again, it's us, man. Like, you can't expect anything.
He's a Raptor killer for sure.
Everyone becomes a Raptors killer, bro. And so again, like I said, if Marcus Smart can be the best version of Marcus Smart, then this contract definitely makes sense, no doubt. However, if he's going to be inconsistent, then this contract could pose an issue. They also gave away Kemba Walker for Al Horford. Now, again, this could be a positive move, right? Kemba Walker clearly did not fit with the Boston Celtics, and you're retaining a fan favorite in Al Horford, who was great for them when he was there. The issue is that was a full 3 seasons ago, and Al Horford has definitely declined a good amount since then. Again, he could be rejuvenated in Boston, and we've seen that with a number of players like, for example, off the top of my head, Nicholas Batum, right? But the issue is Al Horford, at the most, is definitely not the same Al Horford player that he was last time.
He's 35 years old at this point. Yeah. The last time he played for the Celtics, he was 30, 32, 33. So he was still relatively younger than what he is now. So if you expect Al Horford to be, his Boston self, I don't see that happening.
Overall, giving away Kemba Walker for Al Horford was probably overall a net positive. However, like I said, this was not a good offseason for a team that's trying to contend right now. They really did not do anything to get better, and they overall just had a subpar showing, especially for Brad Stevens himself as his, first offseason as Boston Celtics president. It just wasn't great. It was, again, it was mediocre at best.
I think I have to agree. In terms of the star players that they have on the team and the potential that they could be at, they didn't really do much in terms of helping that cause. In fact, you can kind of say they regressed a little bit by losing star power in Kemba, even though he wasn't a great fit. But you lost another star. You didn't really replace him. You kind of just went safer routes.
Evan Fournier.
Yeah, they lost Evan Fournier too, which again, he wasn't good for them, but he still lost him for, I think he was part of a signing trade with Boston. Oh, wait, for cash consideration.
Yeah.
What a stupid thing, man. But yeah, the Celtics really didn't do anything to get better. By the way, all y'all Celtics fans who are basically saying that the Celtics are that much better than the Raptors, you might want to look again, because I think these teams are a lot more even than you think. In terms of who has the best player, obviously the Celtics have the best player in Jason Tatum. But after that, it's pretty even.
And again, the Raptors are not looked as contenders, right? The Raptors are not obligated to win a championship right now. Not really.
Yeah.
Boston Celtics, on the other hand, kind of are getting to that mode where the Sixers are of, you better start actually trying to contend for real.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it's just fun for us. Obviously, the Celtics downfall. It's just fun to see it happen. But, this is kind of what we expected. I mean, Brad Stevens took over, and he played it safe. I think that's the best way I can put it. Right
yeah, that's probably a good way.
He didn't want to risk it. He didn't take a bunch of moves, and he kind of went with what he knew. And obviously, he knows Enes Kanter. He knows Al Horford. Like, he went with guys he knows.
I can't. His safe option, his safe bet was that I still have two of the best young players in the league on my team. You know, if anything, at the worst case scenario, we'll be like a 7th, 6th seed, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens with Boston Celtics, but in terms of them and their performance this offseason, I would definitely categorize it as mediocre, and for that reason, we put them in the losers section of this offseason.
Yeah, so those were our picks for the winners and losers of the 2021 offseason. Let us know what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree with us? Let us know in the comment section on YouTube or on social media. Which brings us finally into a very short up and under segment for this week. But first off, we've teased it basically throughout the episode, but are you up or under on Nerlens Noel suing his former agent, Rich Paul, in Clutch Sports for mishandling, and I think what the official terms was basically making him lose about $58 million of potential earnings.
Well, I mean, I would say I'm up on trying to get money back, especially if people screwed you over out of money. However, my issue with this is this. Bro, Nerlens Noel, what were you doing? Like, what were you actually thinking? And again, this is the exact same thing as basically Dennis Schroder, just with a bit more people involved.
To give context, so I read an article actually on this. So basically, Nerlens Noel's former agent before Rich Paul was Happy Walters, and he was the one who presented Nerlens Noel with the $70 million contract, the $72 million contract from the Mavericks, the 4-year deal. But then, after his conversation with Rich Paul, at a party, Rich Paul basically advised him to don't take that deal. Bet on yourself. I'll get you more money in the next offseason. So Nerlens Noel decided to not sign the qualifying offer, didn't take the deal, the $72 million, and basically has only recouped maybe about $30 million of that money since then.
Well, I mean, not really, because he could have gotten these contracts after he got the $72 million.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, I'm saying, like, of the 72 he could have gotten, he only recouped about $30 million, which is pretty sad when you think about it. But honestly, cool, you can try to sue Rich Paul and see what you can get, whatever, but ultimately you made the decision. It's the same thing like Dennis Schroder. You try to overvalue yourself, or an agent or someone got into your head and made you think that you were worth more. And again, when I looked at what he was actually averaging, only averaging about 8 points a game in that season with the Mavs. And he played 22 games, and the Mavs were ready to offer him $72 million.
Hey, the Mavs dodged the bullet.
They did.
Unfortunately, they evened it out with that Chandler Parsons stuff. But
and the Kristaps Porzingis move later on.
Yeah.
But they had Kasper sign the GOAT Bowl bond, so it's all worth it.
It's all worth it.
But yeah, man, like, I'm up on it. Like, I'm with you. I'm up on it. But at the same time, I'm like, dude, like, this is pretty much your fault. Like, let's be real.
Again, if he's suing him, that means there's like a legal basis for him to actually sue. So he might be successful. But again, this is like, bro, this is Rich Paul we're talking about.
That money isn't coming back. Let's be real.
This is Rich Paul we're talking about. These guys pretty much run the NBA at this point.
They really run the league, man. Like every other day, I see a player. This guy's signing with Clutch. This guy's signing with Clutch. Like, dude, like, they run the league.
Listen, man, like, shout out LeBron, bro. This is the LeBron impact, man.
Pretty much, man. The guy literally runs the league.
Pretty much. Yeah. Next up, are you up or under on the Milwaukee Bucks signing Mike Budenholzer, head coach Mike Budenholzer, to a 3-year extension after their championship?
Man, as much as I want to be under on this, I gotta say it's up. I gotta be up on it just because you kind of have to. Like, when the coach that just won you a championship is on the team, you got to extend him. Again, do I think Coach Budenholzer is a good coach? No. I think he's an okay regular season coach, but I think in terms of being a playoff coach, he's not really that. He had a good playoffs this past season. I'll give him that. But when the Bucks start, losing in the second round next year, the year after that, I don't think.
Already calling it, huh?
Hey, listen, man. The way that things are going, man. If we're in a normal season, I don't see the Bucks making it back to the finals. If I'm being 100% real, as fun as their run was, I don't see them going back. But in terms of this, you kind of have to.
Yeah, I'm agree with that. Listen, like I said, when you win a championship, you automatically have a 5-year window, basically, to just do whatever you want, right? Even if you suck, you basically have like a 5-year window. And this is Mike Budenholzer's window. Again, he coached very well in these past playoffs, but we've been an adamant critic of his for the last number of years. Again, if this is going to be the Mike Budenholzer moving forward that we saw in the playoffs, then that's definitely a good deal. If he's going to regress back to the previous Mike Budenholzer that we saw, that was about to be fired if the Milwaukee Bucks did not make it to the finals, then that might be an issue for the Bucks. But again, worst case scenario for the Bucks, we know Mike Budenholzer is at least a second round coach, right? So worst case scenario, he's still getting you to that second round.
I kind of classify Mike Budenholzer with Frank Vogel at this point, where it's just this like, are they my choices for head coaches? No, but I understand why their teams have kept.
Listen, at the end of the day, there's very few great coaches in the NBA.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of those guys like Frank Vogel, Mike Budenholzer can be classified as good, but not great. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's very few people that are great. And most teams will end up with either a very good, not great coach or a terrible coach.
Yeah.
So, you're getting the better end of the stick when you're getting guys like Mike Budenholzer and Frank Vogel. Or you could have guys like, the opposite end of the spectrum is having a guy like, for example, Luke Walton.
Yeah, pretty much. With that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, YouTube, basically wherever you can find a podcast, you can find us. We're the Up and Under Podcast. Also, check us out on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Up_N_Under Podcast, Facebook.com/Up and Under Podcast. For all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode, our reaction and news as they occur. Also, check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts about every single episode, so if you don't have time to listen or watch the full episode, you can read about it on our website. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, training camps are going to be coming up soon, and before you know it, man, we're going to be back into a new regular season, man. Pretty exciting. Honestly, I'm really hyped up for this season, man.
Yep.
But yeah, with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.